Yeah, great. So let's dive into and have a little look at a player. And so I'm just going to share my screen here, team. So I'll just grab this one up. Great. So you can see my screen there, okay, team? Yep, cool. Great. So basically, what I want to run through with this player here is this young lad. He's quite a good example in the essence whereby essentially he's one of those players who basically what I would describe as does not spend his time very well at all. From when I first met him, he's only dare I say it, he's only 16 years old, I think he is at the moment. But he has big goals and he has big aspirations, and he's one of those typical kids who he loves to go and hit balls on the range, and but ultimately doesn't really derive a lot of feedback from those sessions. Not to mention, he also has a bit of a history of his expectations are what I would definitely say are beyond where he is currently in terms of a skill level. So utilizing circles, what we've actually had the ability to do, we ran obviously the 5-round analysis. So essentially getting the player entering their data is very, very straightforward. We just get the player entering 5 rounds. And I've just got here a bit of a 10-round snapshot to show you. So what we can see, I've benchmarked him out against male scratch. And so currently over the last 10 rounds, he's approximately 6.2 strokes below male scratch. We very quickly can see here that since the 22nd of September, he's actually improved by 14 strokes, which is just ridiculous. But it's actually getting him to be aware of what's going on. And in a very quick snapshot, we can see his top strength is his approach play, gaining 1.52 strokes, and his biggest area of opportunity is still driving the golf ball. So if we just scroll down here and take a quick little look at what's going on, and this is the way ultimately I would look at this player very quickly as a snapshot. We can see his score to par on average is 3.9 strokes over par. We can see it is coming down over the last 10 rounds. So he's trending back down towards his benchmark line, which is fantastic. And this is definitely the best thing I actually think about the platform is the ability for the player. Well, I was going to say player and coach, but I'd say more so even just the player to be able to get that visual interaction and actually connect with what they're looking at. So very quickly, you can see the radar graph here, and what we can see is that the blue is where he is currently, and the gold or the yellow diamond is male scratch. So we can see based over the last 10 rounds of golf, he's actually outperforming male scratch in his approach play. He's pretty close in his short game, and he's got room to improve there in his putting and his driving of the golf ball. So very quickly he gets that snapshot, and it's quite engaging as that graph starts moving. It incentivizes the player. Hey, I want to close that gap. So there's already that connection with the improvement. Now, one step further from there is what Craig was just mentioning before about that decision fatigue. Is the beautiful thing is once 5 rounds are in the system, we get the ability for the improvement opportunity boxes to start populating. And these 3 here are Taylor's the name of the athlete, Taylor's biggest areas of opportunity. So we can see that those areas he can gain 7.29 strokes by improving these areas to male scratch. That's driving, putting the ball 7 to 21 feet, and short game under 20 yards. Now, the exciting thing for me is looking at this young lad. We identified that. So when I first did his 5-round snapshot or analysis, his drive, if you can look at the first 5 rounds, his driving was really poor. Okay, losing a lot of strokes off the tee. And if I was to ask the question to the group as to why would that be the case, I think a lot of the time the player would just say, "I'm just a bad driver of the golf ball. I'm just hitting it poorly off the tee." It wasn't actually the case. He just had terrible course management. So he was just choosing the wrong shots off the tee. He was teeing it up on the wrong side of the tee box. Technically, he's pretty sound. So what we actually started to do was we started to look at his decision-making from the tee. And the way in which we got to that answer was by actually first of all, collating the data. Second of all, then me having the ability to ask the right questions of him. Then thirdly, layering that out then to the training, which we'll get to shortly. And by him training effectively, we can start to see that his driving of the golf ball was really trending up. These last 3 rounds are a big national tournament we have here in Australia, which is a national level event, tough course, tight driving course, and he's actually driven the ball really well. So one of his goals was to drive the ball with good efficiency or good effectiveness that week, and he did an extremely good job of that. So that was one of his goals achieved. Over into the putting area. So just to, so I should say also, so even though he's based over the last 10 rounds, he's still losing 5 strokes off the tee. But that being said, on that date range of the 22nd of September through to October 15, he's improved by 10.9 strokes. So that's the improvement over time, and that's where he is live at the moment. And then putting, we can see that he definitely has some room for improvement in that 7 to 21 foot range. We'll dive into that in one second. And then also in the short game aspect, he's improving. He's doing a pretty good job. He's developing that part of the game out, and that's through understanding his proximity and his shot patterns and a little bit of spin control as well. So what I'd like to actually do is go into now, we can actually go into his trends. So if I come up into his trends over this side, so total strokes gained, he's really improving, as we can see here, which is wonderful. So again, the engagement in the player being able to see live where they're tracking. So that's what I mentioned earlier. When players are getting data, they just often have numbers in front of them. Here we get to see the trend graphs. From their point of view, all they're doing is putting their rounds in, and now we're seeing the output of information. We can see his driving trends improving. His approach play is doing a very good job. Short game, fairly good too. But we can, if we look through those 4 areas, we can see the putting is not quite improving at the same rate. So let's take a little detailed view of his putting. Okay, so again, the gold line is male scratch, and his putting is still down here. So it's improved a little bit, but not a lot. Come down to his subcategories, and we identified it was that 7 to 21 foot range. So if we come down to his stats, this is the wonderful area here. So basically when I get a player to look at their own stats, or when I'm running it through with them, is we describe it as their gap analysis. So whereabouts do they find their largest gaps in performance? So very quickly, we can see, if we just understand these 3 columns, okay, this is where the player is currently on the left-hand side in the rounds that we've got selected, the benchmark down the middle, and the gap on the right-hand side. So his putts per hole is not too bad. So green indicating that he's better than male scratch. And then if we look at some of these red areas, or the largest areas of largest gaps, we can actually see the distance of putts made. He's not holing relative to male scratch. He's not holing enough from a total distance of putts. But also then when we identify down here, really is that 5 to 10 foot range, which is what I want to target in with the player, and then the 15 to 20 foot range. So what we can see is from 10 to 15 feet, he's making around about 17%, give or take, okay? And so there's only a 4% gap. So, but from 5 to 10 feet, he's only making 28% versus a benchmark of 47%. So that gap of 18% is going to be a focus of his. Now, where he would often come in is the player would often come in and say, I'm just, as Craig said, a subjective view, I'm just a bad putter. The kid's not a bad putter, but basically given the way he typically trains, the way his training history. So if you can, an example would be, I think if we can all think of a player like this, he goes to the driving range, he's a bit of a range rat, he hits lots of golf balls, he'll often go to the short game, he'll pitch them around a lot, but he won't then typically then go and finish putts out. He won't go put himself under pressure in training. So all of a sudden, those 5 to 10 footers that we're faced with all the time on the golf course, he's not really putting himself in that environment in practice to whereby he would actually be experiencing some of those external pressures or external factors that would influence that performance. So that 5 to 10 foot range is definitely a goal of mine for his to improve. So the logical next step of that would be the how, or how are we going to improve it? And this is where we then can come over into his practice log. So if we go open up log practice here, so just giving you a little bit of a background on the software. So basically, the autonomy for the player, or that removing that decision fatigue, we can see here now we have every aspect of the player's game, as Craig brought up earlier with that raw data. Now, the areas that say focus next to the individual skill have those areas of largest gaps relative to his benchmark. So if we scale down to his putting, we can see here that his putts between 7 and 11 feet, 12 to 16, 17 to 21, and over 21 all have that focus next to them. We then see on the right-hand side, the right column, is some bespoke goals relative to Taylor. So if I was to open up his 7 to 11 foot putting range and click on that there, we now have the opportunity to see how the player can go and practice. So as I mentioned earlier, that role of teaching and coaching, we've got the teaching element whereby I may be working on some stroke data. We can do that through TrackMan with putting, PuttLab, Capto, whatever you use for your putting analysis. But then we've got to translate that to performance. So then I want the player out on the course or on the putting green, applying that variability, no two putts the same. So the player goes and hits 10 putts from that range of distance. Full routine, completely engaged in what they're doing. Once they do that, they record how many they made in this box here. Their goal was to make 3 out of 10, which is approximately 10% higher than their benchmark. The player would then translate that then to going and doing another distance range. And often what I'll get them doing is depending on their time availability, but they might do 3 or 4 of their practice drills, log them in. And once that player's logged that practice, we then have the ability to then go back and I get to see his activity. So this is the player's round. So we can see the player's I can find each individual round, and then I can go to his practice log. So I can see now his practice log. So he's started logging his practice from October 1. So this is that perfect example. Why I wanted to use this player as the example for you was this was the typical player who gave me 0 feedback about his practice in terms of from an objective point of view. It was all about, oh yeah, I'm practicing really hard, or I'm hitting lots of balls on the range, but I didn't know what he was really doing, or I had to trust what he was doing. So we can now see if I just open this one up. He's had quite a big practice session here. He's done 10 activities. Okay, he's achieved his goal 8 times and he missed out on his goal twice. And he's trained everything from his proximity to hole from the fringe to some putting work, and we can see where he's elevated his skill, where he needs to still improve. So that accountability from the player and the coach is that they start to really dock together or join together. So I stress to the players that their improvement is only as good as our joint accountability to one another. So I put a promise to the player that they get 100% of my support and my feedback at any time of the day, night, whatever it may be. But on the same token, the accountability for the player to actually train the right way is definitely is now on them. And the brilliant factor of this is not only do we see the stroke data coming from the rounds, but when their rounds are getting sent back to, their practice logging is getting sent back to me as well. I can see that player is completely engaged in training in the right area. Their time is being efficient, and we're moving forward. And then as a result of that, we can definitely see that the trends are starting to move in the right direction. So we've set some goals around improving the putting and the driving aspect. I've got the player coming in again at the end of the month, which is now in the next couple of days. We'll reevaluate that. So I typically do a reevaluation every month with the player just to create a little snapshot, depending on how much they're playing. Over here in Australia, our tournaments have been few and far between because of the current situation, but the tournaments are ramping up now, moving into the back end of the year. it's very important to start getting this accountability with the training and making their time really efficient around tournaments. So going back into that periodization factor of like trying to get the player to peak out at the right time, getting into practice the correct way is obviously is really, really important. So we can also then create evaluation snapshots for the player as well. So often what we'll do, this is an earlier one from what we did with the player in the early days. Now, essentially, the interesting thing with this player was also his mum and dad were under the impression he was putting a lot of time and effort into his game, which time and effort don't often always just equate to outcome. So it's how the player spends that time and where the effort is actually going. And as mentioned earlier, that holistic approach to the player's golf, that yeah, I want them performing well, but their mental health is also really important as well for them to perform well. This player didn't have great mental aptitude on the golf course. His ability to deal with outcomes was pretty poor. So that's also often what I find a derivative of how they train and how they spend their time. So if they're just on the driving range hitting golf shots, creating rhythm, hitting it good out of the middle of the club face, they build up this ethos of, oh, that should translate to a good golf score. And as soon as that doesn't, the player then obviously can potentially spiral out of control. So what we did with the parents and the players, we sat down, we understood their game through their evaluation, we create the goals, we create the correct training plans, and then straight away then the expectations are all on the same page. The player deals with result a lot easier. And then also I get them then just doing a little bit of, so this is what I describe as a very objective evaluation. And then their subjective evaluation off the back of that is what was good from the day, what could have been better, and how could I improve it? And that's where they get to reflect on their mental skills. And then we can start putting the training objectives in place from there as well. So the great thing with circles is that connection between player, coach, team. It's very transparent. So the parents or the caregivers or the other members of staff on the player's team, they know how the player's spending the time. So ultimately, if the player's not getting especially if I'm working with a tour player or an elite player, if those outcomes on the golf course aren't being achieved, and then we don't have any good objective feedback from how the players spend their time, they're not doing their job by being accountable to that. All of a sudden, then it falls a little more on their shoulders, and they're not just going to go and blame the wrong areas. So having that joint accountability, that transparency in how time is being spent is just absolutely gold for us as coaches. And it's to be honest, it makes our job easier. And you start engaging with those who truly do understand and want to become better. And I think Craig's on the same page with this. Is if there's often been pushback with keeping data, keeping stats, and I'll just say to the players, black and blue, it's just, do you want to get better? And if you want to get better, we need this information. If you don't want to get better and you want to keep down that same path, by all means, but don't set the expectations in an area that's not measurable. So that's just a little bit of a brief snapshot, an example of how we can run these evaluations and how we can create that transparency between player and coach, and obviously see the engagement and the improvements starting to happen. And this young lad's just loving it. Like, it's just a really great example of how someone who was aware of the wrong areas moved his attention to more effective areas, and he's starting to see the improvement. And he's just a happier kid. He's just a happier, enjoying his golf, and it's moving in the right direction.